So I'm going to go through a simple tracking shot using SynthEyes to track part of the video, and then importing that into Houdini. And so this clip on here is this winter scene, and it's with this guy, Matthias. I'm not sure what country he's from. I can't pronounce his last name. Just like most people can't pronounce my last name. and and so I made a segment of that, and this website, Pixabay, you can download these files, but you should respect under the licensing of what you can and you cannot do. And so the content's available for free, and then you can modify it and adapt it into new works and use the content without having to attribute the author, although giving credits is always appreciated by the community. And so you don't have to list the guy's name in there or where it came from, but it's always a good idea to do that. Once you credit things, it builds up your respectability and your credibility. You're not trying to hide things from other people. It also might give you more work, because if it gets back to these people that you use their work, they may refer you to somebody else for something else. So anyway, respect the licensing. And so this website, and I searched for like winter trees, and I found this shot, and they did have quite a few other shots like with that winter theme. And so I like this one here too. I tried tracking that. It was a little bit more tricky because it's a straight through. This is a horizontal, a little bit easier to track. But there's a lot of great shots in here. And with this shot, one of the ideas that I had is that trying to put in markers for the trees, and there are, when I tracked it, there are some markers in there for the trees, and then try to put in just vertical tubes that act as a tree that become like shadow blockers, so that if I have particles go through, then I'll have kind of a tingliness to it. And is there audio? Okay. Anyway, um, and I did a flip book of the shot, and I offset my frame so it starts at 1000, uh, and so here's a flip book of, this is my track, and you can barely see my tracking markers in there. They're light green. There's some scattered up in the trees and on the ground on the surface. And there's a fellow in there that's almost 6 feet tall, maybe 5'11" at the eyes, I think. And then I put in a tree that's got a couple of bend stops on it to bend it so that, let's say, if this guy emitted particles, then they could bounce off that one tree in the foreground. So, or you could have it hit with an explosion and catch on fire. There's a lot of things you can do with it. And this is I think I spent about 6 hours on this trying to get this set up. And it probably still has a lot of problems. I had to go through it a few times to get it to work. But let me show you what I did in SynthEyes. So in SynthEyes, this is the shot, and you can see it's starting at frame 0 to 275. And then what I did is that when I exported it, I added 1,000 frames on it. And I'm not going to go into the technical part of SynthEyes, but when I read it in, I kind of, if you follow along the basic SynthEyes tutorials, it'll show you how to set up a shot like that. And one thing that I fortunately didn't have to do, because the way the shot is moving, I didn't have to define the ground plane. SynthEyes automatically by itself found the ground plane, whereas I was working on another shot earlier today where I had to define the ground. Because if you don't define the ground as being flat and 0, for some things in 3D it doesn't matter, but if you're trying to do particles and have things fall, the gravity and ricochet off the bottom. You need to have that like sense of gravity of things falling down. And if you don't define the ground plane, the camera could, in the real world could be, or in the 3D world could be upside down or sideways or bent or even a little bit off, so that, let's say, if you had particles that hit the ground, actually roll down the hill. And I was working at a company in China once where the tracker guy didn't have that much experience, so he was delivering me tracks, and I had to drop something on the floor, and for this collision thing, and it just rolled off the floor, and because the tracker person didn't set it up correctly, that was actually one of the reasons that drove me to the necessity of learning to do tracking. So that's why I got on it. So if I go through this, you can see that it defines all these tracking markers. And a lot of these trees here at the base, are close to the base, there are tracking markers that got exported. So I could use those markers to help me define where the trees are. Because if I wanted to have something in here to block the light and then put particles like flowing through there that got lit up by the sunlight, it has to have a shadow to get that kind of twinkly in between thing. And the more accurate I could be, the better. One thing that I could have done, so these were all pretty much generated by the auto track. I didn't do any manual tracks, but if I were to go through there, I would have picked the base of that tree, the base of this tree, and especially the bases of those trees in the background right there. A couple more over there, this one. And so that I would have better light blocking objects. They don't necessarily have to be perfect, but if I had some, like an object in there, and then I put my light back there, then I would get a better sense of that sparkly, twinkly light thing going on. In my Houdini file, so I got my Houdini file here, and I ended up, I did put a guy in there, and one of the things is that when I tracked it, I didn't scale the scene accurately, like, how big it should be for a person. So I got this test geometry, this Tommy guy, and if I go in here and I click on this node, he's 1.6 meters tall. So that's kind of my average height for a person that I use, 1.6. And I did that by scaling it here. So I tweaked the scale here until I got 1.6, or and there's another trick I could have done. It probably works better. I could have done this. If I wanted it to be 1.6 exactly. So yeah, 1.61. So I could have gone this. I could go by 1 divided by $sign size y is y times 1.661, and lo and behold, that didn't work. I need a $sign in there. My Houdini variables mixed up. Okay, there we go. So now that gives me the same thing. And I kind of did it by like trial and error, but this will give me exactly. So let's say I wanted the guy to be 1.75. So he's a little bit taller, so he's like, like scary height, like the Rock height or something like that. And then also one of the things with the camera is that the camera in my track looked like it's pretty much exactly horizontal, and the horizon being there. And so my camera height, actually, when I exported it originally, my camera, let me turn this guy on. So my camera height originally was like 4 meters off the ground, and that's not really correct. And that means that when I was in synthesize, I didn't set my scale correctly. And oftentimes that's the case. This happened with my farmer's co-op shot that I did. So I put in this node here in between a couple of nulls, and I scaled that there. And I did that scaling until I got a camera height that I wanted. And then I got this sphere here, and my sphere reads in the camera origin. So I read in it's a point, reads in the XYZ point, goes into my camera, and there's a point there. But my camera has already been scaled. It's been scaled by this. And so because it's scaled by that, then I get this guy. And so it brings in the correct scaled point, which is, well, it's where the camera is. We can't see it. And then I copied a sphere to it, just colored it red, and then offset the sphere so it's like basically kind of in front of the guy's head. The guy goes, the camera moves, it kind of goes around it. So it passes in front of the head. It's following the camera, but it's at the right height. And I did that kind of as a judgment so that if I wanted to make sure that this geometry, oops, go back, is the center of this is 1.5 meters off the ground. And so that's 1.5, and so this guy's a little bit taller. So then I can use that to help scale everything. And as if I get a track that wasn't scaled correctly, at least ground plane is correct, but the scale is wrong, this is a way to kind of correct it in post. And the reason why I can get away with that is if you understand something about the rules of perspective, is that if my camera is, 1.6 high off the ground, then, and if the camera is looking straight, that will be the horizon. The horizon will be right in the middle of the picture. Now back here, I don't know if it's looking up a hill or, if it's a true horizon or not, but I'm assuming the camera's like pointed down slightly. And if I check it, if I look at the camera from the side, let me go side view, it doesn't really look like it's tilted down any. That's my one. Okay. So my camera, if I zoom in on it, my camera doesn't really look like it's tilted much. And so I can't really say that that's true because the geometry would look a little bit different. But and so there's something fishy about it that I don't quite like. But scale-wise, if my camera height is looking straight, the horizon will always be in the middle of the camera. And so I got my camera height, and then this is basically still on my camera height. And so I think my scale might still be off a little bit, but depending on what I need to do with it. And so this isn't a professional shot, and I'm not working with anybody else to try to match move to make sure everything's perfect. And so in this case, I got to be a little bit sloppy and try to get away with it. But in other cases, I would go back and retract the shot and then just pick a lot more with the scale. Having that human character size in there is real good, and so that's helpful. Now, the other thing in here is that with this shot is that my intention of this is I want to have like some particles flowing off, and maybe they're going to bounce off that tree, but basically they're going to come through there and get lit up by this backlight. I need to have my light in there, and so I did put in a light object, and it's pretty hard to see. If I turn off the background, and then I click this guy on off, you can see right there, kind of right above that red sphere, there's an object. And so now I'm going to turn the background back on, and see if I lined it up with the sun. So display. So it's like a little bit low and a little bit to the right. And so I'm going to go in here to my sun object, and I'm going to raise it up. And I pushed it like, all of a sudden it was a half a kilometer away. And then I'm going to move it over a little bit. And then, ideally, let's say I would have it be, where did it go that far away? Oh, there it is, right over there. So then I could move it by tens. Okay. So, I mean, 1 1/3 kilometers isn't really that far away, or it's probably further because of that. So now I need to raise it. So let me click this back on. I'm just trying to put it far enough away that it makes sense. So let me try to get it so that that red object is right underneath it. So, okay. This is a little bit drag on delay on that. So now it's going to be up. So I'm just trying to make sure that my object, let me go back to is my sun position is close to where the sun is shining from. And wait, not right. It looks like it's just a little bit taller. A little bit more than that. Okay. So this is where my sun position should be. And in Houdini with the mantra render, I'm going to have my I'm going to use the sun because that can do a nice shadow. I should probably try to set it up in Garman. So now I look through that light. So I look through my sunset, and then it should be pointed right at that guy. So go in here and then my light, and because it's I'm not getting a zoom feature on it like a camera. So sun off distant orthographic width. So it's not letting me tweak with that sun angle. That's for like the spread of the shadow. So it's kind of giving me that look. Maybe I don't know what to do. I hope so. So anyway, that's going to be my sun, and then how much I want the shadow to blur out is going to be dependent on this angle. So if I set it to the default, it usually looks pretty good. But if I want to make sure that when the shadow gets cast, it's got a little bit more blur to it, I might want to tweak that a little bit. So that's how I set up my sun, and basically I had to go in, and the translation was already done earlier. Then I just want to make sure I center it, so it's going to be looking kind of straight at that. You may want to angle it down a little bit. So it's kind of right in the dead center of the screen. So I'll do that, and I'm going to upgrade my Houdini file. And like I said, I spent quite a bit of time on this, and so trying to show someone how to do it in 10 minutes is pretty tough. But I got my tracking markers all important. Now, what came out of this is what I would like you to do is that I had a command file that I exported from Modo, and that gets read into Houdini. And so I think in this export, so what you would, let me just save my file, save, and then I'm going to get a new Houdini file. see. Oh. Okay. So open up a new file, and then in my list, here's my command file that I generated. And so I'm going to, in this window, my text bar, I'm going to type source, and then I drag that file there, and then it finds the path and enter. And there, lo and behold, it added everything. And then I go to my camera, and if I select my camera, and go to my background image, then I can go to I save these in different places. And now I provided the frames, and so I trimmed the frames. I also picked the 540, it's better. And then once I loaded my camera, I can hit the D key, go to background, and then display. And so there, I got my lined up. Now the thing is that down here, I offset my timing where 1, and then check the frame range. I'll go back to my window. Materials. So in my trim, or my trim 540, which is what I gave, if I list alphabetically. So first frame, and I renumbered these, and I think I did a simple Unix script to renumber them. So it goes from 1000 to 1277. And so then I need to make sure that my last frame is 1277. And then, so I get my alignment. So now, when I loaded it, it went ahead and set the timing to 29.97. So this came from a video, and not frame and not shot the film. And so the synthesize command automatically set back right. It didn't set my frame range. Originally, frame range was 1 to 277, and then I offset the number. So when I set my track to output in synthesize, here, I'll show you that. So when I got my track set up correctly, then I would go export, and I could pick all these different programs. I could pick After Effects, Maya, and so it's kind of good to like try to set up something for both, for different programs. If you have the tools like export, pick, and then I pick Houdini script, and that writes a command script, and then like I showed you, I just sourced that command script in, and it read it in, and then I ended up doing adding we right click on that, null, add a null, and then get another null. And then this is where I did my scale. And if I scale here, everything's going to still look correct. in the viewport, it's going to change all the geometry to because it scales the tracking markers and the camera, and if they're scaled together, it will work. And then before, when I was working at a company that was using both 2D and Maya, we had to do a trick like this where the scale factor would be 10, from Maya to Houdini would be like 1/10. So we'd scale everything down to 1/10 of the Maya size, and it's just this exact same trick like that. Scale the camera and the tracking markers, and I mean, if you look off to the side, you do that, you scale it, you see that everything gets bigger or smaller, but the camera right there, also scales with the geometry, so it works. And so that's how I was able to go through my camera and then put my 6-foot figure in there, and then scale everything up and down until it looked correctly. And then, I mean, there are tricks. So, like with the horizon, is that the sun it's not sunset yet, but it's really close to sunset. And so, if the sun was like half cut off, then we might be able to see the horizon a little bit, and if we didn't have all those trees in there. But anyway, that's a trick. So, like I said, the horizon, if your camera is not at an angle, the horizon will always be at the camera height, right in the middle. And that's a good way of judging the horizon, which I did in that other shot with the guy in there, so that have the background turned on. Background, and make sure I'm looking through the camera. So then, if my horizon is like right there, my camera height. But if my camera is looking down, so, and then I kind of look at this now and I go, it's not perfect yet, and probably the guy is too small. Right now, compared to the camera height, the camera looks like it's taller than the guy. So if I want him to be bigger, if I want the rock character to be, more than that high, so maybe I'll go 1.8 or 1.9, so it's going to be real tall. That can't be 2 meters tall. That's gigantic. And so, so those are the way. So if I know that how high the guy is supposed to be, then I can use that to judge against my camera height. So, I kind of learned that. I used to do perspective drawing a long time ago, and I learned the rules of perspective drawing, and knowing the perspective drawing helps you get your 3D stuff lined up. And I also worked with my parents in the photography business, and so they taught me a lot about lighting and angles and things like that from photography. So now, because I'm setting this shot up, if I want my guy to be bigger, let's say even 2 meters tall, for the effect that I want to create, it's probably going to look better like this. It looks a little bit more natural, and some of that has to do with my not having a tracker marker inside. So a lot of times when you shoot your real thing, you'll bring a yardstick or a meter stick along with you, and when you go out, you lay that down and you take some reference photos of it, or you include, you start tracking, like, if you're going to move in from over here, maybe so the camera moves that way. So maybe you start shooting and your yardstick is right over here, and then you rotate the camera, knowing that you're not going to use that first part. But then, if you have something in there that's a meter tall, or let's say you measure that tree, and on the bottom you know that that's here, and then that clump of snow is so many, meters tall right there. And you also measure, the width of the tree, or, you can, if you put a rope around it, calculate the circumference, and you can you can determine the radius, the diameter of how wide that tree is, using your high school geometry. And so those little tricks are good. So this height of the guy, which is bigger than my other file, it probably looks better. And it's going right up to the sun, and maybe that's kind of cool because it's going to eclipse the sun. So if I use him as a shadow object for my particles, that could be kind of cool. So maybe even 2.2, 2.1. So when the camera goes by that, it's going to kind of obscure the sun. And then if I had some particles in there, I might get some kind of cool glowing effect. So, and like I said, this is, if I was working with a big team, and especially if there's a lot of other related shots and the character is a certain height, I wouldn't have to be a lot more picky about this. But because this is like a one-off test shot, I can ballpark it and get it getting kind of close is good, because if I have particles and things in gravity falling, it's good to have it close, because then all your other effects are going to look better. But if you're way off, like by scale of 5, 10, or 0.2, or something significantly off, then all your tricks of gravity and making things look good in your particles, you're not going to be able to rely on that past experience. So anyway, this is my story about using this shot, and then I'll save this Houdini file out again as a reference and upload that.